of a reasonable policy statement that we'll use for guidance.
We could have seen some experiences that we had as indicators of our new condition, and we didn't see them because we interpreted them very differently. Let me give the very specific example of the Great Depression of the 1930s, when the economic system went haywire. Banks were closed. People were suddenly without their funds. People were out of jobs, massive unemployment, and so on. And so in spite of the fact that we had these means of production, of producing ample supplies of the goods that people wanted and so on, we weren't because of shutdown of factories. And the farms were producing what they defined as a surplus, but it wasn't a surplus in the sense that there was more than people really needed or wanted, but more than people could buy because we were suddenly without funds and so on, with the banks closing, with the stock market crash and all that sort of thing. If we had seen that not just as an economic crisis, but had seen it as, this is what happens, folks, when you don't have access to the resources that you've grown accustomed to using or have grown accustomed to needing, that your lifestyle depends upon, then we could have seen it as a foretaste of what would come later when we had genuinely overshot real carrying capacity.
In the future, I think it is necessary that we have greater energy efficiency in the technology that we use, but that alone is not going to be enough to get us past a peak oil crisis. We have heard much about the possibility of finding a transitional liquid fuels, to get us through what will apparently be a growing gap between demand and production. What we have not heard is something called the Jevons paradox. William Henry Jevons was an English economist who wrote in the mid-19th century. He said that when you increase efficiency in the use of a resource, ultimately more of the resource gets used than ever before. In the United States, after the oil crises of the 1970s, enough people switched to driving more energy-efficient vehicles that the price of oil came down and people drove more than they ever did before. And so that ended up using more energy than had been used previously. And ultimately, we live with the repercussions of that today.
For many decades, we've had air pollution control, and especially here in California, where we have a state air resources board that sets standards for things like cars, and local air quality management districts. So here in Los Angeles, where we have some of the most polluted air on Earth, we created regulations which by the year 1990 roughly had ended most of the stage 1 smog alerts, let alone more severe ones, stage 2 and stage 3. But then in the beginning of the 1990s, and obviously as we progressed closer to into the 2000s, we find more people driving SUVs and driving more miles and sitting on clogged freeways for many more hours a day. So all of that has conspired to put many of the pollutants back in the air, even though each car may be cleaner. There's so many more, and it's spending so many more hours combusting the fuel, that it has led to stage 1 smog alerts coming back. As we know now, the oil and auto companies spent a lot of time and money trying to confuse the public and regulators about what was actually coming out of those tailpipes and what was actually the harm as a result. The research shows that children who are living within a mile of a busy urban freeway lose as much as 1% of their lung function every single year. That now there's laws in many states, including California, that say you can't build a school within so many hundred feet of a freeway for that very reason. When you look at the science that shows that 100,000 people die prematurely in this country every single year from completely preventable petroleum-related air pollution, and that 6.5 million more suffer from asthma and other respiratory diseases, week after week, month after month, there's a steady drumbeat of more science that shows not only are there more harms than we thought to our reproductive system, to our ability to think, to shortening our lives, to shortening our breath, but that levels of pollution we previously thought were benign are actually very harmful. And because we're spending so much more time in traffic, and there's more of us, we have a growing pollution problem with many more of these pollutants that are threatening our very lives.
This question of hard landing, soft landing, and does the political system collapse? Of course, I hope it doesn't. I kind of like the way the world has been working, but again, Americans benefit from, a huge supply of cheap energy. So I'd say it's just about 50-50 between getting our act together and starting to resolve the problem as fast as we can and put in the temporary things like a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit or the high-efficiency diesel automobiles that are being marketed in Europe, wind energy because the wind turbines are well engineered now. But even then, there's the possibility that some event, like Saudi Arabia descends into civil war, or something in the economy collapses, and then the whole economy collapses. So if you want to claim that some miracle will come along, like horizontal drilling or three-dimensional seismic, some miracle will come along and bail us out, we should adjourn over to the nearest synagogue or mosque or church and think about it. But it verges on religion to say that some miracle will come along and bail us out.
If we presume a global peak oil scenario, and we presume that we descend the peak at about the same rate as we ascended the peak, bell-shaped normal curve, then we would begin to see real pain within a year or two, and that pain would accelerate as we move forward in time, because simply significant large blocks of buyers will be knocked out of the market with all the pain and chaos that ensure, but they will be pushed out of the market by the price. So if it really adjusts to the price it should be as a rare resource given peak oil, the price will shoot up, you'll have massive recession and inflation and dislocation, but the consumption rate of oil will be dropped because it will simply move out of the realm of the feasible, out of the realm of the plausible pretty quickly. However, it takes a real, and here's the disconnect and the chaos and the pain, you can quickly respond to a change in price. Well, I can't afford that anymore. That doesn't necessarily take a long time. But you cannot quickly redo a production and residential and agricultural infrastructure to take account of and maneuver around that sudden change in price. If you believe in a market economy, if you believe in classic market economics, then prices order human behavior and prices determine distributions of wealth and income. Once that happens, you have wild dislocation in human behavior immediately, and you have wild dislocation in the distribution of wealth and income. And that creates a socially chaotic and economically chaotic situation. It creates recession and inflation together, terrible combination called a stagflation often in economics, because the way we battle inflation is usually with a recession, and the way we battle recession is with inflationary policies. So all the policies we have as economists to deal with economic trouble basically systematically fail in a stagflation, when you have a decrease in economic activity but a sharp increase in price. That is the point, the kind of conditions under which classic economic policy making is a total failure. So we are set up poorly to handle it. It will be a massive dislocation, and it would be something to be very much working around and against, and to be very much frightened of.
I see the oil situation as part of a much broader situation.